Hi, we're here today to talk about some guidance that we've been producing on psychologically informed consultation. My name's Amanda Tetley. I'm a consultant clinical psychologist, and I also work as a clinical lead for the complex emotional needs pathway within the NHS England Midlands Clinical Network. And I'm here today with some of my colleagues. Faye, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Faye Cook. I'm a consultant clinical psychologist. I lead a team called the Enhanced Team for Personality Disorders in Birmingham and Solihull Mental Health Foundation Trust.
Fabulous. And yourself, Jack?
Hi, so my name's Jack Farr. I'm a principal clinical psychologist and I work with Faye in the Enhanced Team for Personality Disorders. So first of all, we're talking about psychologically informed consultation. So at times we might refer this to PIC. Certainly in the e-learning we'll refer to it as PIC. And it's meant for psychological professionals, but we're encouraging that anyone really interested in this may find value in it too. So PIC can be understood as the process of sharing the psychological skills and knowledge of the consultant, who is the professional with more training in a particular area, with a consultee. Draws on psychological principles to enhance the treatment or support plan of the person under consideration. PIC can be offered to colleagues across health and care, whether individually or as teams, where there are challenges arising in a service delivery. So at its core, that is the definition in which we're holding when we're talking about psychologically informed consultation.
We actually started this in 2023, and obviously it's taken on a life of its own, hasn't it? So the two of you really initiated this, didn't you? So Faye, do you want to tell us a little bit about how this came about?
Yeah, of course. So we had a foundation year trainee clinical psychologist on placement with us. Jack was clinically supervising. And we've had a consultation offer since we started back in 2017. Our team became operational.
Yeah.
So we thought, great opportunity to do a really formal service evaluation. We chose consultation because it's a key offer. And we really thought that it would be quite easy to find the standards of which you could measure consultation. So when the trainee came to us saying, how do I measure what consultation is? What does it look like? How do you know? We were like, it's absolutely fine. There's lots of policies, lots of guidance. And it's true, there are. So the Royal College of Psychiatrists paper, the Shining a Light paper, NICE guidance, all recommend that personality disorder services should offer consultation, but none of them say what it is. Wonder if you want to say a bit more, Jack?
Yeah, I think it presented a real dilemma for us. I think as a supervisor, I was very enthusiastic, and as Faye was saying, kind of, this shouldn't be a problem. It's something we're trained in. We've been doing it in our team for ages, and a great opportunity for us to understand more about our consultation offer. But Shana, who was the trainee, part of the university element was to do kind of an audit bit, which was kind of marrying up to guidance, checking kind of actually are we doing something that's best practice, essentially. When we actually searched the literature, there wasn't anything that really said exactly what consultation should look like. And it sort of opened up a bit of a can of worms, really, because we couldn't quite believe that in some ways. Because the way that we're trained is that kind of scientist practitioner model. And if you looked at kind of therapy or supervision, there is really clear guidance as to what to expect in those sorts of spaces.
Yeah.
Consultation, we kind of just we didn't really know. There wasn't really anything there. And so we just started asking around.
Yeah. And I think that's how I linked in with yourself, isn't it, Amanda? So I'll put something on the Futures platform asking, does anybody know standards? Got a few responses, but actually there were responses about therapy or supervision. And then that was when you contacted me and we agreed, let's just link in the three of us initially.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think from my perspective, working as a clinical lead on the complex emotional needs for the Midlands NHS England Clinical Network, it felt really important because it was such a key part of the transformation work for people with personality difficulties. So it felt a very key thing to work on together, didn't it? Yeah, and we had quite a series of meetings together, didn't we? Just really just thinking about it together, all of our ideas around it. What do you remember, Jack, of some of that?
Yeah, I think I remember in the kind of early days, we were kind of acknowledging that there were like a few exceptions. So we've spoken a bit about cognitive analytic therapy and there being CAT consultation. but it was very kind of specific in terms of what it sort of talks about, how many kind of appointments that you might meet with the client and the staff team, for example. But when you kind of step away, kind of zoom out slightly, that was where like the inherent issue was in terms of what is consultation. And I remember we were just encouraging each other, let's just go see what we can find, ask around. And around that time, I went to one of our sort of trust-wide psychological professionals meeting and sort of asked the question, like, who's doing consultation? What does it look like? How do we know it's consultation? And I remember some like stumped kind of responses, which was partly validating, but partly kind of reaffirmed the, oh gosh, actually, this is something we probably need to know more about. And so people started talking about things like referral screening, which for me didn't really fit as consultation. That for me felt like a different offer as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We should probably say something about what the guidance, actually, where this went. And so we came up with an idea, didn't we? Why don't we put some of our thoughts on paper? Why don't we write this as guidance for psychologically informed consultation? And then from that as well, then Faye, you linked in with the PPN network, didn't you? And then we've built it even further into an e-learning package as well. Do you want to start us off here with what that contains?
So it's really important that we mention that there's a fourth person that was part of our group. So we have Olivia as well from Surrey and Borders, and Olivia leads a service where they do co-delivered with experts by experience consultation. So I think that brought a really different flavour, didn't it, to what we were thinking about, because that's more of a primary care service, whereas I think the three of us tend to sit in more of a secondary care service. So when we were looking at the guidance, I guess we started to think about, it's not a model, so it's not a therapeutic model like CAT you were mentioning, Jack. This more feels like a framework of the key things that those of us that have been delivering consultation and leading services where it's part of our offer, how would we know that somebody was delivering consultation? So we started with that background. And then I think one of the really important things was to start to help people to have that standard that we were missing. How would you know it's consultation? How is it different? What is it not?
Yeah.
So I think there's some of our key sections.
We spoke a bit about the idea of pulling this together would be like, if two people are sat in the room having a conversation, we should be able to get to a point where you could go, oh, is that therapy that's happening in that room? Is it that they're just having a bit of a chit chat? Is it psychologically informed consultation? You know, we want to have enough that someone should be able to look at that framework and then identify what's happening in that space and say, oh yeah, actually I can see what that is. We'd create a pre-consultation form, and I think there was a practical element to that because it allows us to understand the question sort of in advance. Not necessarily for us to sort of dive in and try and learn a lot before, but it helped us kind of know what we were going into. And actually, I think it helped us understand that this was, in fact, a consultation and not something else or better suited to be discussed in a different modality, you know, supervision or reflective practice or referral screening. But that idea of like identifying the question we found really helpful, because at its core I think that differentiates this offer. It stopped it from becoming a deep dive into having to know everything about everybody.
Exactly.
And that's probably about the client and the person bringing the question, you know, something that we might explore in supervision, say. It really applied a focus to the space, and that was a real core part, I think, from us starting with the foundations, what it should look like. Faye, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I guess I was thinking one of the things it helped in our team as well was people often felt like they needed to spend a lot of time looking into a case before consultation and feeling like they needed to come up with a really in-depth formulation for that 30-minute sessions. And actually by having a question, it really galvanises the focus and helps you to feel like you can step away from needing to know lots about the person. Because I guess the next step of what we think about is the formulation and having some psychologically informed thinking in there. But you're not formulating the whole person.
No.
You're formulating the problem that question really kind of pertains to.
That links in quite nicely to what you started saying, Amanda, about how that's where we might have different psychological models that we're drawing on. but actually we're not saying which model, or we're not specifying how that should look. We're just identifying that for it to be psychologically informed, the expectation is there is some sort of psychological knowledge that's being brought into the space. I often think about the person coming in has the knowledge of the client and the question. We're coming in as sometimes a bit of that sounding board, another head to think with, but what we're bringing, hopefully, is that psychological knowledge, so we can formulate that space together.
Yeah, absolutely. That helps with that understanding. That's our second stage, isn't it? We've identified the problem, and then we're coming up with the understanding and bringing our formulation skills as psychological practitioners into that. And then, Faye, I always remember just being really struck as well by you talking then about how we then get advice from that as well. We thought, didn't we, that the next stage, a little bit like in psychological therapy, is almost like the intervention, but the intervention part is the advice that we give to consultees. And I remember your thoughts around that being really helpful, particularly how we think a little bit about that and the number of recommendations.
Yeah, I think because at the point at which we started developing these, the guidance, we'd been offering consultation for about 5 years at that point. And I think what we'd learnt was very often people seek consultation when they can be feeling quite overwhelmed by something that's happening, either their own reaction or what the service users kind of stuck with themselves. And if they come into a consultation and we feel overwhelmed in response to that, what we often do then is give lots of advice. And that might be really helpful advice, but actually it can be really hard for the individual that's seeking that advice to take it on board because it's just too much. So we kind of agreed in our team we'd just have 2 or 3 key recommendations. And I also think sometimes what we do is cheerleading. Like Jack said earlier, it's not always advice giving, or sometimes the advice is you're doing a really great job. And I think we forget how important that can be from a psychological perspective. It's just that encouragement of somebody else. But yeah, the recommendations, I think it's really important to keep them to a small number, and also that what you're recommending is within the competency of the consultee. So not asking them to do something that isn't within their job role or not within their gift to provide as well.
Absolutely. And that's where we also thought, didn't we, it's so important to evaluate this with the consultee as well in the moment. And Jack, I know this is something you really brought to the table for us to think about together.
Yeah, so I guess part of this is driven by the sort of nerd in me, that bit that kind of really likes that scientist practitioner kind of take on, I suppose, psychological work. But there's kind of different layers to it. I suppose there's the evaluation in the moment. So if you're making recommendations, you don't want to run into the situation where you've suggested something, but actually it's not practically, as I think Faye, you quite nicely said, it's not in the gift that they can give. So you want to be thinking and seeking that feedback as you go, sort of evaluating your consultation in the moment to make sure that you're creating recommendations that feel plausible, feasible. And then there's kind of secondary to that, you've got the experience of the consultation sort of afterwards, and that's perhaps a slightly more formal process for many people. It could be done indirectly or just through conversation, but I know in our team we've developed sort of a feedback form, and we've split it into kind of 2 sections. One way to think about the individual's experience of the consultation. What was it like working with that consultant? Did you feel listened to? Did you feel validated and heard? Was the client central to the conversation? Those sorts of exploratory questions. But then really trying to think, what is it in consultation we're trying to do? So we're trying to build confidence. We are trying to ultimately cascade knowledge down to support a service user. So trying to understand actually, has there been any implications from the consultation? So trying to capture that as well. It becomes quite a big part, doesn't it? Because that's how we evolve and make sure we're doing something that's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's making me think, well, we've just talked about the model that we thought to guide psychologically informed consultation. And that's one chapter in the e-learning package, isn't it? There's actually lots of other chapters as well. We have, obviously we're starting by setting the scene of what consultation is, aren't we? The different areas that it could be used in. And also thinking, what I referred to earlier as well, about the governance and infrastructure that's required as well. And also that idea, which I think you've spoke about already, Jack, as well, of what is not consultation. How does it differ to the other things that psychological practitioners do as well, such as supervision or reflective practices, etc., etc. So there's a lot in there. There's a lot in the e-learning package there, isn't there?
I think sort of thinking about the journey that we've been on, those kind of early conversations when we were scoping out where we're at within our kind of trusts and with other professionals, at first there was a sense of, oh no, like, oh no, why don't we know this? But as things started to develop and actually we were collaborating and meeting other people and presenting and seeking feedback, I think that feeling quite quickly changed into one of enthusiasm, and there was a real appetite. And I think that's really helped us kind of keep it like an ongoing development process. It wasn't just us in a bubble. It's something that sort of evolved over time, trying to acknowledge that services will run differently. They will look differently. The populations in which people and services are serving will also look different. So I felt like the idea of kind of zooming in and zooming out has always been really helpful for me. And I think, meeting and hearing from others allowed me to zoom out and kind of appreciate actually how fundamental this is for so many psychological professionals.
And I think I sometimes thought what people were saying to us as well is maybe this is an underutilised aspect of the work of psychological practitioners. And I was just thinking as well about our experiences of using this. Well, I mean, I would say I feel like this has been very driven up from practice, really. So we were delivering consultations while developing this, weren't we? And and learning as we go. I'm interested, the two of you, as how your experiences of utilising this.
I guess I tend to do less of the consultations in our team now. I'm often brought in when there's a really complex consultation, and that's where we'll often have a few of us, 2 at least in our team, because you need lots of heads when you're meeting with lots of other people. But I think one of the ways in which we've used it is to help new people joining the team understand what we mean by consultation. And like Jack said, it's not that we're expecting you to not use your core psychological model, but this is the framework in which you use your model. And actually, I think that's been a really key part of how we've used it in our team, as well as individually, which Jack does lots of our consultations. He can talk more.
Yeah, I think it's been a really interesting process, and I guess I'm sort of reflecting sort of actively now on it, because I think it's a great sort of question. It makes me think about the early days of me doing consultation in the team, and often I had to kind of almost filter through, like, are they seeking a consultation? Do they want a question? And do they have a question they want to think with me about? Or do they want to refer someone to me? And actually, by creating a bit of a clearer kind of infrastructure, a bit of a process, I've noticed a real shift that most of my consultations these days are people who genuinely are kind of at a point where they feel stuck and they want a space to think. And the tone and experience, I guess, me as a consultant, and I think it comes back in the feedback from the consultees as well, is it's created a much more open and quite honest space, I think, as well, because there's clarity as to what we're offering. And a lot of people have spoken about the validation that they've received, but also practical next steps. Because I think sometimes people, it's not enough. Validation is so important, deeply important. But in the systems in which we work, sometimes people who are actively in it all the time, just an idea what one little next step could be, it's so powerful. And, I've really appreciated that as part of the journey.
I was just thinking something you were saying there as well about giving clarity, and I think what you were saying, Jack, was as well giving clarity to people who are coming for consultation, the consultee, as to what actually happens here and how it looks, and I would agree with that. And I'd also say, as we were developing this as well, that really made me think when I was delivering consultation about how structured am I here. And I think one thing that really stood out to me reflecting on my own practice as well was I don't know that I was always as good at keeping recommendations down to 2 to 3, and I did one and I gave 2 to 3 recommendations, and I remember meeting the team again a little bit after, and they'd absolutely stuck in their mind those 3 recommendations, and and this is what we've been doing. So I thought, oh, that's excellent.
Yeah. But you also, I remember you talking about, Amanda, you used it in a way that we hadn't really thought about when we developed the guidance, which was in supervision.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So I had it in mind as we were developing it with, supervising a clinical associate psychologist, a CAP. So as we know, for CAPs, a core part of their training is in consultation. So it's really, really helpful because, I could use it as well. These are the different stages we might want to look at. But also, as everybody will know, for some of the CAPs as well, they record some of their work as well as part of their assessment. So being able to use it as well as a supervisor to then, when listening to recordings and then being able to reflect on it together in supervision was incredibly helpful. Because I think sometimes people training do come to us, don't they, and they say themselves, what is this consultation? What am I doing here? So absolutely.
And I remember going to present at one of the national forums, and I think it was the National Forum for Complex and Emotional Needs, and we presented about it, and there were lots of service leads there and even some chief psychological professions officers, and the enthusiasm about consultation, but also that, wow, you've helped us think about a problem that we'd got, which is how do we evaluate consultation? Because it's one of the indirect offers. It's incredibly hard to evaluate indirect psychological work, but this framework that we've put together, hopefully with some of the ideas around evaluation, helps us to start to think about the worth it can bring. I remember that was a real kind of key aspect that people often reached out to us about, like, can we have more information? How could we do this? How do we record it?
Yeah.
It makes me, my mind's drifting slightly into the hopes, I guess, of how this might evolve, because we've always said it's kind of like that foundation structure that things can wrap around, or individual kind of experience might look a bit different. So we talked about different models of therapy might sit within it. And it's a shame Olivia's not here to talk about some of the lived experience kind of co-consultation offer as well. But it's something we've started in our team to look at. But actually, for us being very clear in our team about what we're offering in our framework, it feels so much easier now to support an integration or development of something else. So in our instance, thinking about a lived experience practitioner joining us and thinking, actually, this is what we're offering. How can what you bring sit with that? How can we make sure that this is now an important part of that consultation? I think before that, there probably would have just been a kind of see how it goes. So I feel more confident in it as well.
In having lived experience practitioners as part of the consultation.
Yeah, and I think my ability to offer it alongside, because actually I'm more clear. I think we used the word clarity before. I'm more clear about what I can offer in that space, and the pulls to want to deep dive that we don't need to. We can stick to that question. So I can bring my psychological kind of knowledge and formulate, and how that can sit alongside a lived experience practitioner, then kind of bringing their experience of that question. It just feels like an easier way to marry it up, but also without creating something that could go on for hours and hours, or the recommendations kind of growing longer and longer.
Absolutely. And it makes me think, and I feel if Olivia was here with us, she'd speak about this as well, that when we have lived experience practitioners with us in psychologically informed consultations, that they have the same support around them that we do. We have clinical supervision, don't we, where we can talk about consultations we've offered and how important it is if we have lived experience practitioners that they have a supervision space as well, where they can discuss it, that they're trained in that particular area of work and supported, and part of a service that delivers this and has an infrastructure for it, and us not losing sight of that as well.
And that felt important when we developed the guidance, didn't it? That at that time, Olivia's service did co-developed consultation, and our service was kind of edging towards it. I think you were still in the stages of developing it. And actually, we shared the guidance with our lived experience practitioner to get that lived experience view. And one of the really lovely things that came back was just keep the service user's voice at the heart of it,
Yes.
which I hope that we all do as psychological practitioners. But it was a really lovely reminder that we can just ask things like, what would the service user say about this? Have you spoken to them about it? What would they like advice on?
Yes.
Some of those key things that a lived experience lens brought that we might have overlooked if we hadn't have had that view.
Yeah, it makes me think about this word clarity that's come up a lot, isn't it? It adds clarity to kind of everything, and hopefully for the service user who's receiving the consultation, they will also get a clearer kind of experience from whoever the team or individual is actually supporting them, because all the way up then there is a process, isn't it, that can be observed and spoken about. And we've spoken a little bit about infrastructure. One of the things in my mind, which I wasn't sure we've touched on, was just this idea that perhaps separates consultation from other offers as its own unique and thing that should be celebrated, is that the idea that we're bringing heads together to think. So there's a very different kind of power dynamic that might inherently be present in other spaces. And if we're bringing in lived experience, again, it's another head, but equally kind of together. So when we make recommendations, we're not saying that they have to be done and that we should follow them up and check on them. It's the idea is, take some of that pressure off, think together, generate knowledge together, and that's where that ongoing evaluation, you want them to be recommendations that do feel helpful, that can be applied, but there isn't that kind of pressure that someone's going to sort of chase you down. Have you done this? And I think all of that just contributes to a freer space to be able to think about and hopefully cascade that knowledge down.
So I think we've talked about some of our hopes with regards to the guidance and the e-learning package. Have we missed any of our hopes? What do we hope, and what do we feel like the future holds for this work?
My gut feeling around that is that we just hope this is something that will be picked up, and I guess it's the thing I want to say is, we're not like precious about it. What we're hoping to do is develop something that can go on to be developed.
Absolutely.
We want to generate conversation, discussion, something that's useful. I guess, and maybe it is my hope, I just hope to see this continue, and I think we will actively be involved in our services and hopefully together. But I'm excited to see who else gets involved and what else might come from this.
And we do know there's some interested colleagues around the country in research around this, as I know we are ourselves as well, aren't we?
I think we always kind of said it felt like the starting point, didn't it? And we thought quite early on about if we wanted to publish something on this, that we might call it consultation, opening a can of worms. Because like Jack said at the beginning, the minute you start looking at something that is kind of really core to our profession and what we do as clinical psychologists especially, but all psychological practitioners, and then you realise that we haven't got standards to measure it against. So this absolutely feels like the start of something for us. We might have opened the can of worms, but we need to still work through that can of worms together as psychological professionals.
Yeah. And I suppose on that note, maybe this ties back to the hope, but I don't think many people will read this, our guidance, our framework, and be shocked by it or feel like it's something that they're perhaps not already doing. It's sometimes about applying something to what we're doing. It's that practice built, as you mentioned before, Amanda. So I hope as this kind of gets out there, gets cascaded, that people pick it up and see it as something supportive, not necessarily challenging to their practice. So yeah, I think it's really exciting.
I think one of my hopes is as well, I hope it increases the offer and accessibility of psychologically informed consultation within secondary mental care, but also outside of that as well. I hope I've been really, really enjoyed hearing about psychologically informed consultation that happens into primary care, into voluntary community faith groups. I know there's a lot of interest where I work in that. I think it offers a space for people to feel like they're being further invested in. And a place to reflect on some of the difficult work that a lot of our colleagues do in primary care and volunteer community faith sector as well. So I think that's one of my big hopes as well for this. And so it's one way of increasing that psychologically informed way of working further.
my sort of slight inverse hope, you just stimulated a thought for me, is that because on the reverse side to that, you've got the people receiving the consultation, and I hope it gives, as you say, validation, a space for their individual work to be thought about. I really hope this kind of allows services, service leads, commissioners to understand and appreciate this as a distinct offer. I think there's a growing understanding of the need of supervision in practice, for example, and reflective practice spaces. I think consultation, as we acknowledged in the literature and in the policies out there, is acknowledged as being important, but being able to describe why it's important, for me, I think it opens up lots of doors for the future as this being a core offer for psychological professionals, and it being valued as something that, as it should be, can be really effective.
Absolutely. So I wonder if we should just say something about where this can be accessed then now. Yeah, so it will be the guidance and the e-learning package will be available on the PPN website and also on the NHS Learning Hub. So we hope lots and lots of people will access that.
Yeah.
So we hope that you all find our guidance and e-learning package really, really helpful, and we're looking forward to seeing even more psychologically informed consultation everywhere.